of the practice. So the next presenter is Jasinski, who will talk about deploying Django to Heroku.
So I'm Joe Jasinski. I'm the technology manager at Imaginary Landscape. And today I'm going to talk to you about deploying Django to Heroku. Today we're going to talk about 12-factor apps, platforms as a service. I'm going to introduce Heroku and talk about getting started with Heroku. Then I'm going to talk about some tips with integrating Heroku with Django. And if there's time, we'll go through a demo. This assumes a little bit of Django background, but we won't get too deep into it. So first of all, let's talk about, we can't talk about Heroku without talking about 12-factor apps. Basically, a 12-factor app is a philosophy for application development for cloud-based apps. Its core goals to help you create apps that automatically provision and deploy, scale well, and create consistent environments between deploys. Oops. So more specifically, the tenets of a 12-factor app are that apps are tracked in a single code base, usually inside of a Git repository. App dependencies are exactly specified, for example, in a requirements.txt file for Python apps. Everything that varies between environments is configured via environment variables. This would be your settings. Apps connect to backing services, which are network-attached services that your application consumes. This would include things like databases or Redis or S3. Apps follow a strict build, release, run policy. So there's no runtime changes made on the server. You're not making commits on the server. If you need to make a change, it goes through the specific build, release, run process. Apps run as a single process, or one or more processes in an isolated environment. And state for those apps are stored in your backing services. So there's nothing that's shared between processes. Apps communicate with their backing services via port binding. So Postgres, or your app might communicate with Postgres over a regular port. 12-factor apps focus on concurrency, so you can scale out easily. For example, you can spin up multiple web nodes or multiple worker nodes dynamically with little cost. Apps should be disposable, so app servers can be destroyed and recreated at any time. The development and production server should match as close as possible. Logging for each app should be sent to a single output stream. This makes it a little easier to aggregate and manage from a central location. And one-off batch processes should be executed against the same code base, but in a separate process. For example, if you want to run long-running processes or send bulk emails or do database migrations. So let's talk a little bit about platforms as a service. And basically, a platform as a service is a cloud-based system for running 12-factor apps. So with a platform as a service, your only concern is actually coding your app. The app's infrastructure and services are all managed for you. This reduces complexity and scales well, but you have, as a result, a little bit less control over your infrastructure. And some examples of this are Heroku, Amazon Elastic Beanstalk, Google App Engine, and OpenShift, and there's a bunch more. So Heroku is a service for hosting web apps. And Heroku is also a platform as a service. And it basically exemplifies the 12-factor design. It supports a lot of different programming languages. Python is one of them. It's pretty easy to use, and it's free to get started. So it's great if you're running like a personal website, or if you're a small startup and you want to scale up and pay for the resources as you build. One key concept in Heroku is the concept of a dyno. And a dyno is basically a single running process that executes your code. So you can think of it as like a disposable server. And so you can spin up dynos, like if you want to have multiple web dynos or multiple worker dynos. And the pricing for Heroku depends on how many dynos you spin up. But if you want to run a single dyno, you can get, that's where you can qualify for the free tier with some restrictions. So Heroku has a lot of add-ons, which kind of correlate to backing services in the 12-factor terminology. These include databases, mail sending services, monitoring tools, loggers, and a lot more. There's just a whole bunch of them. So getting started with Heroku is really easy. To sign up, it's literally a super simple form like this. Once you've registered, you have a dashboard which you can create a new app by clicking New. You can set a global unique name for it. This has to be unique across all apps in the system. And you create the app. Then you need to choose the version control system you want to use for deployment. Heroku uses Get for deployment, so when you push your code to the master branch on Heroku's remote, it will automatically provision a server and deploy your code. So on your desktop or your development environment, you want to install the Heroku tool belt, which is basically a command line tool for managing your Heroku instance. So there's builds for most popular operating systems, and it gives you access to the Heroku command. And then the first thing you want to do is log in with Heroku login. And this will associate your desktop with your Heroku account. So to get your code base set up with Heroku, the first thing you can do is create a new Get project with something like get init, or you can use an existing project. You'll add your server code to that project. You'll set Heroku as a remote for that. You'll commit the project, and then you'll push to the remote. And then automatically it will provision and build a server, and you'll have a URL like this which you can access and deploy your code to, or your web app will be running. So to deploy a Django app to Heroku, there's a few things to configure. After creating your Git repository and your Django project, you need a few specific files in your code base. One of them is a proc file, and this is the actual file that Heroku looks to actually execute your app. So in this case, Heroku is executing Unicorn, which is kicking off your Django process and running the Django app. You also need a requirements.txt file, which you want to specify exact versions of the Python packages that you want to run. You want this to be explicit because this will probably be run multiple times as you push changes, and you always want to have consistent environments whenever it gets rebuilt. And it's also a good idea to add a getignore to your project to make sure extra junk files don't get committed to your Git repository and get deployed to your production environment. So with Heroku, you configure your app with private environment-specific settings. And specifically, Heroku uses Unix environment variables for configuration. So you would set API keys and username and passwords and email addresses as environment variables in Heroku. So environment variables persist amongst all of your dynos. So once you set an environment variable for an application, it stays there until you remove it. There are two ways to configure environment variables. One way is through the Heroku config command with the Heroku tool belt. And another way is using the dashboard. You can have access to and change all of your environment variables in a nice GUI. In your application, you can actually use the environment variables. For example, in this Django settings.py, you can just read in the environment variables using the standard OS module from like standard Python with os.environment.get. In this particular example, I have a few helper functions set up so that it will do some type conversions, but basically all it's doing is reading in an environment variable from the Unix environment and making it available as a setting in Django. So how do databases work in Heroku? Quite easily. There is a Heroku adds Postgres via an add-on, and this is accessible via a databases menu item. So you can create the add-on, select the pricing tier you want, and click Add Database, and that's it. Now, the free database comes with a limit of 10,000 rows, but for a lot of purposes, it gets you by for getting started. You can drill into the database and see its configuration information. One thing that's particularly of importance is the URL connection string, and this is a string that represents the authority of your app to connect to your database. This is what you'll configure in your Django app so it can connect to this database. So by default, Django does not support this connection string syntax, but there's a project called DJ database URL, which reads in that Django or that database URL environment variable from your environment and then converts it to the format that Django expects. And all it takes is to pip install the DJ database URL and add it to your requirements file, and then update your settings.py file with something like the following. Now, when you install the Heroku add-on, it automatically sets the database URL environment variable. So that step is all you needed to do. But if you wanted to configure and change that connection string, you can do it with the Heroku config set management or command, where you can adjust the query string as you need. And DJ database URL supports a number of different database backends, so you can fit whatever database you like. So how do you host static assets and uploaded media with Django on Heroku? So static assets would be anything that's contained within your app, like CSS or JavaScript or images that are part of your application. And media files would be any user uploaded content. In Heroku, there's no traditional web server to serve static assets, but there's a project called White Noise, which is a simple Python project for hosting your static files. And it's not as efficient as a standard web server like Nginx, but it works pretty well, or works well enough for most purposes. It also integrates really nicely with content delivery networks. So if you really want to scale up your app, you can use something like Amazon CloudFront to make serving static files really easily. So to install this, you would do pip install white noise on your local environment and add it to your requirements.txt so it will get deployed in production. And there's a few settings you need to add to your Django.py or your settings.py, such as adding a middleware and a static file storages backend. And that's all you need to do to get static file storages set up. Uploaded media files are also easy to set up, but they're a little bit different. So this would include anything that a user would upload, such as an image or a PDF or whatever else you want. So because dynos don't store any state, you have to use a backing service to upload your media files to. This would include something like Amazon S3, Cloud Files, libcloud, Azure, and a few other backends, which a project called Django Storages supports. So just as a point of note, Django Storages was forked recently to be called something called Django Storages Redo, or Redux, as I like to say. And this is basically the same project, but it supports Python 3. So installing this is as simple as doing pip install Django Storages Redo and adding it to the requirements file. And then if you want to use the Amazon S3 backend, which is pretty common, you pip install Bodo. To configure this, you'd edit your Django settings file and add to installed apps the storages module, and then set your S3 credentials in the settings.py, as well as the default file storage backend to be the Amazon S3 backend. And this, as the other services do, will read your API key for Amazon from environment variables and set them to your Django settings. So after this point, any files that are uploaded to your app will be sent to S3, which is really slick. Sending email also requires an add-on, and the add-on that I've used and like is SendGrid. And SendGrid is basically an email gateway, and installing it in Heroku is as simple as doing Heroku add-on create with SendGrid. And you'll also need to configure in your settings.py the SendGrid configuration variables, so it'll read the SendGrid variables from your environment and set them to the default email settings that Django expects. So installing the add-ons will automatically set the SendGrid config in the environment variables. To send email in Django, it's really simple. There's no changes needed to your code. This is the same raw config you'd use, or raw send mail function you'd use in any Django project. So the only configuration you need to make the change is in your settings.py to configure SendGrid. So there are a few common Heroku commands that I use quite frequently, and some of which we've already talked about. One of them is git push Heroku master, which lets you deploy your code, or you can deploy a different branch to your Heroku server using a slight variation of this. You can run one-off commands, such as management commands, or just random commands by using the Heroku run command. So you can do Heroku run managed.py collect static, or migrate, or or get into a Python shell. You can set and view your config with the Heroku config command, and you can tail your Heroku logs by with the Heroku logs command. So there are a few resources to get started when dealing with Heroku. One of them is on the Heroku website. There's a great link you should start with, which is how to integrate Heroku with Django. Also, there's all of the examples from this project come from the Chippy website, which is an open source project for the Python user group, and all of that's available online at this link. So that is what you've been seeing all along here. So I'm going to try to do a demo, and I'm going to install a fresh copy of the Chippy codebase via Heroku with just a few commands. So since this is a live demo, we'll see if it works, which I have no expectation that it wouldn't. So you'll have to forgive me because the screen is reversed. So here we're inside of our Chippy codebase. I've already done a git checkout of this of the codebase. Normally, what I would do is I'd issue a Heroku create command, but I've already done that earlier just so I reserve the name. But this would create a fresh app. Then I would need to set a get remote for that app. So I'm just doing a get remote add Heroku 2 is the name I'm giving it, and I'm passing in the URL for the get server. Then I'm going to set some environment variables that are needed for the project, and I'll show you. Here's the example of how you set it, Heroku config set. I'm going to set a bunch more all at once just so I can do it all in one group. Each time it does it, it resets or pushes out the change to the instance and resets it. So now I'm going to add an add-on for the Postgres server. So it's as easy as issuing one command. It's going to be an empty database. Next, I'm going to actually deploy my code to the server, which will automatically provision the server and build it, and we'll have a running instance at that point. Now, this is going to take about a minute, but it goes by pretty fast considering all that it's doing. So it's pushing the Git repository out. It's detecting that it's a Python app. It's installing the Python version. It's going to go look through the requirements file and start building all the Python requirements needed for this app. So it's downloading and installing those right now. It basically is building what Heroku calls a slug, which is like a build package of all your Python packages, and it compiles into one package that it deploys out to the dynos that it's supposed to run it, but that all happens transparently. So it's compiling C dependencies like Pillow and CyclePG2. It takes just a second to do that. Now it's running collect static to copy the static files where they need to be. Doing some cleanup tasks. And now we have a running app. But before we take a look at it, I'm going to migrate the database, which is needed for our Django app. So I'm just going to run the migrate commands. So that error is expected. So this is just the standard Django migrate. It will take just one more second. And that's it. Now we should have a fresh copy of the Chippy codebase. So one last thing, we can destroy this really easily by just doing a Heroku apps destroy, and it's gone. That's all I have at the moment, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to entertain them.
Thank you. We'll have time for a quick question while the next presenter is setting up the computer. I'll pass you the handheld microphone.
Okay. This is yours, right?